Uh, hey, Austin. So this is another chat around iteration for GitLab Design Talks. I'm Nick, and yeah, we're going to be talking right now about your experience of what it's like to be a new designer within GitLab
Yeah.
and what our culture of iteration is like. So first off, you've been here 2 months?
Yeah, almost. First of all, thanks for having me on. I'm super glad to be here. I joined at the beginning of June, so getting into the GitLab culture now, learning the values, learning how iteration happens here, and just kind of figuring things out as I go.
Nice, nice. So you've joined 2 months, so you probably have a few ideas on things that are surprising for you. Like, tell me about your experience of what our
Mhm.
culture of iteration has been like for you since joining GitLab.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful to like step back to where I kind of came from. I came from a large enterprise. We had probably a few hundred designers across the company, but we were dispersed across like hundreds, if not thousands, of applications. So it's a bit overwhelming in terms of trying to make a product better because you're kind of responsible for the entire thing. And that can be a big challenge. Whereas we have like a really solid team here at GitLab focused on improving a singular product, which has been really fun to get down in the weeds and everything. Um, I think that's probably one of the biggest resource changes is having like a dedicated group that's focused around UX as opposed to having just a centralized model where you have a bunch of designers that get dispersed across the company. And so that's been interesting is getting to work with a bunch of people on the same product. Um, but the thing that has stood out to me very obviously from the get-go, stuff ships frequently. Like the train doesn't stop; it's continuing to move. And so whether I'm prepared or not, the team's going to continue trying to ship things. And so that's something that I've had to get used to. But along those lines, it's not just like the design aspect that I get to contribute to. It can be plenty of things like outside of UX. In my first couple of weeks, I was submitting changes to our handbook and submitting changes to some of our processes that got merged in, and those will be a part of what I consider production in the future. So that was really cool. I mean, and last week I was making changes to our code base to migrate some of our deprecated buttons to a new style that we've created. And so getting to contribute outside the UX profession, I guess you could say, like stepping into some of those front end responsibilities or even documentation has been rewarding in and of itself. That kind of embodies that spirit of iteration that you don't necessarily see shared in other companies where you're kind of told to just like stick to your role.
Interesting. So, uh, combined with this sort of iterative approach that we have, you've also noticed the fact that there is also a generalist focus that we tend to have as designers here.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess you could call it a generalist focus. I think it's more just everybody wants to help contribute to make the company better as a whole, as opposed to just focusing on producing designs as the pure responsibility. So you're not just making artboards and shipping mockups, you're also conducting research, you're contributing to our documentation, perhaps adding on to the code base. And that's a bit I don't want to say full stack because I don't think that's an appropriate term for this, but it does give you more responsibility outside of your typical UX role.
Nice, nice. And where do you think sort of iteration is useful for that approach, where the focus is
Yeah.
is is broader than UX or deliverables alone?
Mm. Well, the one thing I've noticed, everything is encouraged to be broken down to the smallest bit possible. And we are like using the term minimum viable change for what we want to push forth in the next release or the next milestone or the next issue that we want to deliver on. And that's provided a lot of psychological safety for myself as a designer because I'm like, okay, if I'm really breaking this down to the smallest thing, it's like changing this one component on the page. I don't feel like I have to go necessarily conduct an entire usability test for changing maybe one component on this relatively small feature. And so a bunch of those little things add up to a lot and change in terms of changing a bigger experience. But it does make me feel a little safer to say, okay, we can make smaller changes maybe without having to go do this full-blown research process, which is inevitably what product and development is, or I guess you could maybe say afraid of. Like they don't want to be sliding their schedule because design's holding up things just so they can continue to test more. And so that's been really nice to not like withhold releasing a feature because it's not perfect. And the thing that's been really cool to see is we have a ton of features that we have identified that are a lower grade experience, like maybe they're a C or a D grade, and the aspirations are to get to an A one day, but the A is not next release. It's like, no, we're going to go from like a D to a C over the next couple of releases, perhaps. And that reasonable expectation really helps provide healthy psychological safety.
Mm, mm. And I suppose what's quite interesting about that is every product like sort of continuously shifts, or should I say every modern product continuously shifts. But what we
Yes.
tend to find is when you have big like 1.0, 2.0 releases, there are quite substantial changes that you see with
Yeah.
other products. Whereas here, our releases are continuous and there's like a continuously shifting and evolving interface. So I suppose the small steps that you're getting or you're taking in order to shift the interface to where it needs to be to get that A grade may be a little bit more smooth and transitioning the user to that point rather than just going, this is 1.0, this is 2.0, deal with it.
Right. Yeah. And it really does feel like you're reducing risk along the way because ideally we're getting some of those feedback loops from users or customers that either come back through people opening up issues and writing up comments about like, hey, this doesn't work, you need to add this, or it could come through our research sessions. So there's a number of ways that we can continue to solicit that feedback. And to me, like I think there's nothing better than the feedback loop of actually shipping something. Designs and mock-ups and prototypes, they help, but definitely shipping to production really tells you, do users care? Do users like this? Is it helpful to them? That really gives you the feedback you need.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. So it sounds like you've been taking really well to this iterative approach and this generalist approach. What's been challenging for you?
Yeah. So some things that have been challenging, like after going through most of my onboarding, I really had to fight against this sense of feeling behind. Um, there's just like a backlog of work that has been going on before I ever joined. And some of those things still have design opportunities to be clarified. There's still work in the future that needs to be clarified and researched and tested. And I just feel like I have this like mountain of work. And I've only been here for a little while. So it's this balance of like, yes, I'm new and I'm trying to learn things, but I also just have this innate desire to like go tackle the world. And I can't necessarily complete all that in 1 week. So sometimes that's a little bit hard to reconcile for myself.
Yeah, you gotta be careful because burnout's a big thing. So we want to be
Right.
avoiding that at all costs. And I think what you talked about is actually something that I went through when I first started. I'm just like, okay, there's so many changes that need to happen. I'm gonna come
Yeah.
in, I'm gonna connect all the dots. I'm gonna put forward this beautifully big issue that summarizes everything, and I'm gonna show it to people, and then nothing happens. So
Mm-hmm.
providing
Mm-hmm.
the context of the big picture is so useful, but at the same time, being able to break apart that big picture vision into
Yeah.
into the smaller components or the
Yeah.
smaller subcomponents or whatever that you're doing is vital.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
from what you've seen so far, like yeah, having a constant backlog of work that you have to be working on, I imagine is definitely challenging. Is there anything that sort of stuck out for you with regards to how GitLab does design or how GitLab does like sort of just product in general, where
Mm-hmm.
you think we could actually improve culturally?
Mm. That's a great question. Something that I'd say is also a challenge for me just to get used to. And I think this is a good value that we uphold with our asynchronous communication, but it's like open, asking questions and open areas. So like the public channels on Slack or within issues, there's so many times that I've been like, I really just want to DM my product manager this question that I feel somewhat insecure about asking in this open channel. And I'm like, no, copy, paste, drop it in the channel. That's something that I've definitely had to try and really push myself towards because I don't want to build the habit of, private messaging someone when our goal is to be open. But in terms of ways that we could improve the culture, man, I think it's hard to know exactly what the best opportunities are when I'm so new, because everything feels so different to me. And in some ways, that's really great. And in some ways, I feel like I still have a lot of things that I would like to learn first before I speak on this is a clear blind spot that everybody has. But the thing that I've definitely appreciated so far is everyone's been really welcoming, and everyone has been willing to contribute and help. So I think it's amazing when a designer that I haven't even met is commenting on some of the designs that I dropped in, providing some feedback of, hey, did you think about this style or this user interaction? We could maybe use this pattern here. And that's very helpful for me. And so I think continuing to encourage that cross collaboration is really, really important, because it definitely helps people that are getting onboarded that don't know the product as well as others.
Yeah, there's a term or a metaphor that we use at GitLab which really resonated with me, which is having short toes. So I think at a lot of companies, especially like big enterprises that you've come from, you always have this little fear that you don't want to be stepping on anyone's toes. There seems to be like a little bit of a political nature along with shipping the products as well. And here we've really cultivated like this great culture of short toes. It doesn't matter. Anyone can contribute to any part of the product, but some people have different areas of expertise, but anyone's allowed to contribute. Everyone's allowed to provide feedback, and that in total provides like this great and sort of diverse set of ideas around the things that you're working on.
Yeah, definitely.
And one of my biggest learnings is I was doing some updates to the documentation for Pajamas, our design system. And I came in like saying, yep, I'm going to do a big component revision for this table, which is a relatively complex component. I'm going to do it all. I'm going to change it. I'm going to lay out a new information architecture. I'm going to talk about new functionality and all this sort of stuff. And I took a couple of weeks to document this entire thing, ship an MR, and it just made it so difficult to review because the diffs in what you're shipping are just so different from what was originally there. So it's hard to compare and contrast actually what you've seen or what you had versus what the new changes are. So breaking that big change down eventually made reviewing the stuff that I've changed so much easier for the people who are reviewing it. So starting out by maybe restructuring the information architecture, then maybe focusing on a new section within that and changing that and doing it step by step. It's not only better because it means you can do your work quicker, it also means the people who are reviewing it and maintaining the stuff, it makes their lives easier as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's just bringing in good software development practices into even a designer's workflow or a PM's workflow. Breaking down work to its smallest chunk makes it easier to ship it. The bigger that it gets, the harder it is to figure out a way to integrate it. And so, again, it goes back to trying to learn more than just being a UX person. There's a lot of other great principles to bring in. I love that.
Nice. And I've got a final question for you. It's what advice would you give to a new designer considering joining GitLab or who has just joined GitLab?
Yeah, so there was a couple things that I did during my interview process that I felt really gave me a good glimpse into what it would be like to work at GitLab. The first thing I would say is like, if you're interviewing for like a specific stage or group at the company, look into that team's like backlog and see what they're doing, see what type of discussions they're having, the problems they're trying to solve, and figure out if that's interesting to you. That's one thing that's awesome about GitLab is our work is mostly public. And so you can find whatever the current team is working on. And that will really help you understand if it actually is interesting work. Like, can you see yourself actually doing the stuff that they're working on? And so if you're a designer, I would say read the handbook page on the product development flow. That'll help you understand where does the design process fit into the way that we build software. That'll let you know, yeah, I like this structure, or it doesn't drive well with you. And if it doesn't drive well with you, then it'll be pretty tough to work here. And along those lines, we have a pretty great library in Figma to build and construct, high fidelity mockups with. So try making something. See if you like interacting with our systems. Obviously, if anybody has feedback to improve those things, they're welcome to submit an issue or contribute to it. But those will kind of give you a taste of understanding how do things go here and if you'll like it or not. Because when you're interviewing, it's equally, do we want you as a candidate, but also, do you really want to work here? And I think our open nature provides the best opportunity for evaluating if you really want to work here.
Nice. Yeah. So there ain't nothing to it but to do it when it comes to our culture to see whether you like it or not. And
Yeah.
I think that's a great piece of advice that you have.
Thanks.
And I suppose one last bonus question, because I'm being cheeky now.
Okay.
What I've asked this to a lot of people, but what has been your biggest unlearning since joining GitLab?
My biggest unlearning has been at GitLab, I need to show up to meetings prepared to participate. I would previously show up and be fed. I would wait for the person that was facilitating the session to teach me whatever I needed to learn in that 1 hour long meeting. And instead here, everything is driven by an agenda. And so that agenda is in every single meeting beforehand. So I have a responsibility to go in, put the questions that I need answered in there, put action items that I would like to discuss in there. And the meeting is about tackling those things. And so unlearning the habit of just like showing up to a meeting has been really hard, and I still do it sometimes, most of the days. But I've been trying to get better about setting aside a little bit of time before each meeting to try and address any agenda items or be familiarized with what's coming up. So that's been a change. And meetings here, they end at the exact time every time. There is no running over, which is crazy to me.
Mm-hmm. And I think just to touch back on the topic of iteration, when you see our Google Docs meeting agendas, sometimes there's only 3 questions or something to start out with, but as we go along, there'll be more and more questions added to it. So it's sort of live edited and everyone's contributing to it. So again, that principle or value of iteration sort of applies not just to the stuff we're shipping, but also the way that we're collaborating and interacting with each other as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I have a question for you, Nick, if you're cool with me throwing one at you.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so I tried to find the article, but I couldn't. But what I remember from it was stating that designers just iterating mockups in Figma or in Sketch or whatever your favorite tool is doesn't actually count as an iteration. It only counts as an iteration if you've solicited feedback and then made changes based off of the feedback that you've received. What are your thoughts? Is it an iteration if you don't have feedback from customers or users?
Yeah. In our handbook, it says it's not an iteration unless it's been shipped. So iterating on designs within Figma or iterating on the stuff that you document within an issue or something like that don't count unless it's been shipped. I think, however, there's a bit more design culture that we can bring to our thinking around iteration. And designers live and breathe iteration when we diverge and converge and all that sort of stuff. So if you think, like a good example of this is the Google Ventures design sprint. And like the purpose of the design sprint is to, in a really quick way, take a hypothesis, design some ideas around that hypothesis, and then test them with a finite number of users to get qualitative feedback to inform the direction and validate that hypothesis. Now, what they do to make it so quick and make it happen within the space of a week is they bypass the build phase and they prototype to a level of fidelity where they can get like some good quality data coming back. So I
Mm,
think there are elements or areas that we can explore when it comes to iteration, which
yeah.
don't require shipping in front of the user, and areas that we can explore when it comes to um, things like user research or A/B
Hmm.
testing or whatever it may be, that can help to inform our decision making whilst saving a lot of money. Because if developers are building something that may not work, it's good to test some stuff out, but it's also nice to be a little bit more certain of the direction that you're taking as well. So
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
like a slight disagreement I've got with the way it
Yeah,
documented in the handbook today. What are your
yeah,
thoughts?
yeah. It's tough because I do think the most like valuable feedback cycle comes from what is existing in production and people are using. And I think something that I've really, really had to adjust to is, since this is a consumer facing app and I typically work on, or in the past, I've worked on just enterprise applications that would live within their own fiefdom, is hearing users' feedback on features that are the MVC. So like, it's clearly like we only shipped the smallest piece of this bigger picture, and we announced it in the release, and they're underwhelmed by the
Mm,
amount of what they saw. And so there's this pull of like, man, I wish we really could have added in more for the user.
mm,
But if we're really embracing the spirit of iteration, like you said, there's small iterations happening within the designers, within the relationship between PM and dev, and everybody kind of participating in that initially, and just keeping it small and iterative as we go. But it does hurt sometimes to hear from users like, this is underwhelming. And I'm like, we know, hold on, like there's more coming next release and next release
yeah,
and next release.
yeah,
But I guess that's just, some people, like our culture in general isn't necessarily used to seeing small feature coming out. They're used to the big iOS leap. They're used to the next jump in Windows. And so they're used to seeing like a full-fledged feature set and then complaining about everything about it that sucks, as
mm,
opposed to seeing little stuff roll out along the way.
yeah.
Um,
That's interesting. So maybe there's an area of exploration that we can try out where we need to start thinking about how we redefine the relationship that we have with our users and customers, and
mm,
help to set expectations on that relationship of what to expect when we're shipping, how regularly we're shipping, but also what sort of feedback would be useful and how they can provide that feedback in like a more effective way.
mm-hmm.
Mm,
Yeah,
cool.
absolutely.
Well, yeah, this has been a great conversation, and I really
Heck
appreciate it.
yeah.
And yeah,
You're welcome.
I'm looking forward to seeing how you progress over the next few months. And yeah,
Thanks, me too.
have a good one, mate. See you in a bit.
Yeah. Cheers, Nick. Bye.
Cheers.